After 5 years, when I finally went to see my grandchildren, my own daughter-in-law slammed the door in my face. Yes, you heard that right. 5 long years of birthdays I wasn't invited to. Christmas mornings I only saw through photos online. 5 years of sitting by my living room window wondering what my grandson's voice sounds like now, how tall my granddaughter has grown, whether they still remember the way I used to sing to them. And when I gathered every ounce of pride I had left, drove across town, baked cookies with these shaking hands, and knocked on their door. She opened it, looked me up and down, and said, "You need to leave." Then she slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. I stood there, on my own son's porch, with a box of homemade chocolate chip cookies in my hands. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe. If you've ever loved someone more than your own pride, you'll understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't bang on that door, why I didn't defend myself. I just stood there, like a woman who had been erased. Before I tell you what happened next, and trust me, you are not ready for what I did after that, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about dignity. It's about silence. And it's about the day I decided I was done being the quiet one. Now let me tell you who I am. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 72 years old. I was married for 43 years to a good man who built this family with calloused hands and Sunday prayers. We raised one son, Daniel, the center of my world. I packed his lunches, sat through his baseball games, stayed up with him when he had nightmares. I believed in him before he believed in himself. And then he married her, Clara. At first I tried. Lord knows I tried. She had that polished smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. Always polite, always controlled. Mrs. Whitmore, instead of Mom. Always just a little cold. But I ignored the small things. The way she'd correct me in front of guests. The way she'd rearrange my kitchen when she visited. The way she slowly began telling Daniel I was too involved. I told myself it was generational differences. I told myself modern women were just stronger personalities. I stayed quiet. When they moved into a bigger house, I offered to help with the kids. She said they wanted space. When I called, she'd say they were busy. When I texted, replies came hours later, short, dry, dismissive. Eventually, the visits stopped. Daniel would say, "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder? I hadn't even spoken. 5 years passed like that. 5 years of swallowing tears. 5 years of pretending I wasn't waiting by the phone. 5 years of telling my friends, "Oh, they're just busy." But this year, something in me broke. Or maybe something in me woke up. It was my grandson's 10th birthday. Double digits. I realized I didn't even know his favorite color anymore. So I baked cookies. The same recipe Daniel loved as a boy. I put on my best blue cardigan. I drove over there rehearsing what I would say. "I don't want trouble. I just want to see my babies." When she opened that door, I saw it immediately. Annoyance. Not surprise. Not guilt. Annoyance. Like I was a bill collector. "You should have called," she said flatly. "I just wanted to surprise them," I replied, holding up the cookie tin like an offering. "They don't need confusion right now," she said. Confusion. That word hit me harder than the door did. "I'm their grandmother," I whispered. She leaned closer. Her voice dropped. "You're whatever I allow you to be." And then she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a full minute after that. I heard my granddaughter's voice inside. I heard laughter. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about misunderstandings. This wasn't about busy schedules. This was about control. And I had been giving it to her for years. I walked back to my car slowly. Not because I was weak, but because I was thinking. Thinking about the trust my husband left in my name. Thinking about the property deed. Thinking about the inheritance papers that had not yet been signed. Oh yes, you see, there was something Clara didn't know. And as I drove away from that house with tears drying on my cheeks, I made a decision. If she wanted to teach me what it feels like to be shut out, I would make sure she learned the lesson properly. But not the way you think. Because I'm not cruel. I'm precise. And what I did 6 months later, when they showed up at my door expecting something very different, well, Let's just say, I opened the door, and I made sure only certain people walked inside. And the one person who once told me to leave stood outside, in silence. You know what hurts more than a door being slammed in your face? It's the 5 years before that, when the door is slowly closing and you pretend you don't see it happening. After Clara told me, "You're whatever I allow you to be," I sat in my car and let the engine run longer than I should have. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness, from clarity, because that sentence didn't come from nowhere. It had been building for years. The truth is, I didn't lose access to my grandchildren overnight. I was erased inch by inch. At first, it was small things. When Daniel and Clara had their first baby, my sweet Emma, I was there every week. I rocked her while Clara showered. I folded tiny pink onesies. I memorized the weight of that baby in my arms. But Clara never seemed comfortable. She'd hover, correct the way I held the bottle, say things like, "We're doing things differently now." I would smile and nod. "Of course, honey." When my grandson Liam was born 2 years later, the distance grew wider. Suddenly visits needed to be scheduled. Phone calls needed to be texted first. I was told the kids were on strict routines. That surprise visits disrupted structure. Structure. That word became her shield. If I brought cookies, too much sugar. If I bought toys, too stimulating. If I gave advice, outdated. Every gesture I made became a problem to solve. And Daniel, my boy, he was caught in the middle. Or at least that's what I told myself. I remember one evening, 4 years ago now, sitting at their kitchen table. Clara had just finished explaining why I shouldn't kiss the baby on the forehead because of germs. I apologized. Apologized for loving my own grandchild too closely. Daniel didn't say a word. On the drive home that night, I cried harder than I did the day my husband was buried. Because grief is one thing, but being unwanted while still alive? That's something else. After that, the invitations slowed. Birthday parties became small, immediate family only. Thanksgiving was traveling this year. Christmas morning was just us starting traditions. I told my church friends, "Oh, young families need their space." But space became silence. Silence became absence. Absence became normal. I'd scroll through social media and see photos. Emma with missing teeth, Liam holding a soccer trophy, and I wasn't there. I didn't even know he played soccer. Do you know what that does to a grandmother's heart? It doesn't explode. It shrinks. Slowly. And the worst part? Daniel began sounding like her. "Mom, you're taking this too personally. Mom, you're overthinking. Mom, Clara feels judged." Judged? I had bent over backwards not to judge. But I started noticing something else. Whenever finances came up, Clara leaned in. When my husband passed, he left everything organized. The house was fully paid off. A modest investment account. A lake property in Vermont that had doubled in value. Nothing extravagant, but secure. And suddenly Clara showed interest in my long-term plans. She'd ask casually, "Have you updated your will recently?" Or, "It would be smart to simplify things legally at your age." At your age? I was 67, not 90. One afternoon she brought over a folder. "Just some basic estate planning forms," she said sweetly. "In case anything happens unexpectedly." Unexpectedly. That word echoes differently now. I didn't sign anything that day. But I saw it. The calculation. The quiet evaluation of what I owned. That's when the visits nearly stopped completely. Looking back, I understand something I refused to admit then. I wasn't inconvenient. I was in the way. As long as I stayed quiet and distant, I was manageable. But if I became active, present, emotionally connected to those children, I became unpredictable. And unpredictable people complicate control. The year before the door slam, I tried one last time. I invited them for Sunday dinner. I kuka Daniel's favorita podruast. Set the table with the china his father bought me on our 20th anniversary. They canceled an hour before. Liam has practice. I later saw pictures of them at a neighborhood barbecue. That was the night I stopped calling. I wanted to see if they'd notice. 3 months passed. 3 months before Daniel texted, "Hey Mom, you okay?" Haven't heard from you. Haven't heard from me. I stared at that message for 10 full minutes. Because what I wanted to say was, I've been here the whole time. Instead, I replied, I'm fine, sweetheart. That's the kind of woman I was. Fine. Polite. Contained. Until the day she looked me in the eyes and said, You're whatever I allow you to be. That sentence snapped something awake in me, because I suddenly realized I had allowed it. Allowed the disrespect. Allowed the exclusion. Allowed my own son to slowly distance himself without demanding better. And as I sat in my car that afternoon, cookie tin untouched in the passenger seat, I made a decision. Not out of anger. Out of understanding. Clara believed she controlled access. She believed she controlled the narrative. She believed she controlled me. But there was one thing she didn't control. The future of everything my husband and I built. And in 6 months, when Daniel called and said, Mom, we need to talk about the estate paperwork. I said, Of course. Why don't you all come over? All of them. Clara sounded very different on the phone that day. Very warm. Very respectful. Very eager. Funny how tone changes when money enters the room. But what happened when they arrived at my house? When I opened the door and stepped aside only for 2 small faces, while keeping one woman standing on the porch. That's where the real lesson begins. And trust me, she never saw it coming. 6 months after she slammed the door in my face, my phone rang. And I already knew who it was before I looked at the screen. Daniel. My son rarely calls during the workday. So when I saw his name flash across my phone that Tuesday afternoon, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't a just checking in call. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice sounded careful. Hey Mom. How have you been? Oh, I said lightly. Peaceful. There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. Mom, Clara and I were thinking, it might be time to talk about the estate paperwork. Just to make sure everything's organized. For the future. The future. Isn't that interesting? 5 years I couldn't see my grandchildren. 6 months since I was told to leave. I kept my voice warm. Calm. Southern sweet with a little American steel underneath. Well, honey, I said gently. Why don't you all come by this Sunday? Bring the kids. It's been too long. And now suddenly, we're planning futures together. He exhaled, almost relieved. Yeah, that sounds good. And then, I heard her voice in the background. Soft. Measured. Intentional. That would be lovely, Margaret. Margaret. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not silence. Not distance. Margaret. I smiled into the phone. Sunday at 2, I said. I'll be expecting you. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I stood up, walked to my hallway mirror, and looked at myself long and hard. For the first time in years, I didn't see a lonely grandmother. I saw a woman who had options. You see, in those 6 months after the door slam, I didn't waste time being bitter. I got organized. I met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Evelyn Carter. Calm. Brilliant. Unimpressed by emotional manipulation. We updated everything. The house, placed into a protected trust. The lake property, transferred. Investment accounts, reassigned beneficiaries. Medical directives, locked down. Power of attorney, revoked and reissued. And every single document had one primary beneficiary. Emma and Liam. Not Daniel. Not Clara. My grandchildren. With very clear instructions. Funds accessible at age 25. Educational trust secured. Assets untouchable by spouses. Untouchable. Oh yes. Evelyn made sure of that. Family disputes happen, she had told me, tapping her pen against the paper. But assets can be structured wisely. Wise. That's what I chose to be. Not angry. Not cruel. Wise. Sunday came quickly. I baked again. But this time not as an offering. As preparation. The house was spotless. My husband's photo polished. My navy blue dress pressed. At exactly 2:07 p.m., I saw their SUV pull into the driveway. Clara stepped out first. Hair perfect. Smile rehearsed. Body language relaxed. like nothing had ever happened. Daniel followed, looking slightly nervous. And then the back doors opened. Emma, Liam. They were taller, older. And when they saw me standing in the doorway, something beautiful happened. They ran. Grandma. Their arms wrapped around me so tightly I almost lost my balance. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Clara had tried to rewrite, love had survived. I knelt down and held their faces. Look at you too, I whispered. You're growing up without permission. They laughed. Behind them, I could feel Clara watching, calculating, waiting. Daniel approached carefully. Hey, Mom. I kissed his cheek. Soon. Then Clara stepped forward. Oh, Margaret, it's been far too long, she said, reaching for a hug. I stepped slightly to the side. Not rudely, not dramatically, just enough. And instead of hugging her, I held the door open wider for the children. Emma, Liam, I said warmly, come inside. I made your favorite cookies. They rushed in. Daniel hesitated, confused. Clara paused on the porch, still smiling, but her eyes flickered. That tiny crack. That's when she noticed something. I hadn't moved. I was standing in the doorway, blocking her path. Oh, she laughed lightly. Are you going to invite us in? I tilted my head gently. Of course, I said. Then I looked at Daniel. You're welcome inside. He stepped forward slowly. Now it was just her, standing there, on my porch, exactly where I had stood 6 months ago. The air shifted. Her smile tightened. I assume I'm included? She asked sweetly. And that's when I said the word she would never forget. I'm sorry, he replied calmly. We're keeping things structured today. Structured. The same word she used to keep me away from my grandchildren. Her face changed. Just slightly. What does that mean? She asked. I folded my hands gently in front of me. It means the children and my son are welcome. You can wait here. The silence that followed was thick. Daniel turned sharply. Mom. I raised one hand gently. No one is confused today, I said softly. I'm simply maintaining boundaries. Boundaries. Another one of her favorites. Clara's voice dropped. This is ridiculous. I met her eyes. So calm. So steady. So was slamming the door in my face. Daniel went pale. The children were laughing inside, unaware. And Clara realized something terrifying in that moment. I wasn't the same woman anymore. And she had just stepped onto a porch where she no longer held power. She took a slow breath. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said quietly. But don't worry. We'll discuss everything. Just not today. She stood there, on my porch, exactly as I had once stood on hers. And for the first time, she understood how it felt. But this was only the beginning. Because what I told Daniel inside that house, what I revealed about the estate, what Clara overheard through that door, that's when the real panic began. And once panic sets in, Clara stood on my porch. And I closed the door. Not slammed. Not dramatically. Just firmly. The click of that latch echoed louder than any argument ever could. Inside, Emma and Liam were already in the living room, pulling cookies off the tray, crumbs falling onto the carpet I used to vacuum before every holiday dinner. Daniel stood near the doorway, stunned. Mom, he said quietly. I placed my hand gently on his arm. Go sit with your children, I told him. We're having a family conversation. Family. That word matters. He hesitated, glanced toward the front door where his wife stood outside, then slowly walked into the living room. Through the window, I could see Clara's silhouette shift. Arms crossed, Clara stood on my porch. And I closed the door. Not slammed. Not dramatically. Just firmly. The click of that latch echoed louder than any argument ever could. Masks fall. Inside, Emma and Liam were already in the living room, pulling cookies off the tray, crumbs falling onto the carpet I used to vacuum before every holiday dinner. Daniel stood near the doorway, stunned. Mom, he said quietly. I placed my hand gently on his arm. Go sit with your children, I told him. We're having a family conversation. Family. That word matters. He hesitated, glanced toward the front door where his wife stood outside, then slowly walked into the living room. Through the window, I could see Clara's silhouette shift. Arms crossed. Pacing. Uncomfortable. Ah. So that's what discomfort feels like when it isn't mine. I walked calmly into the living room and took my seat in my late husband's armchair. The leather was worn exactly where his elbow used to rest. On the coffee table in front of me sat a neat stack of papers. Organized. Clipped. Precise. Daniel noticed them immediately. "What's all that?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap. "That," I said gently, "is why you're here." Emma looked between us. "Grandma, are you in trouble?" I smiled warmly. "Oh no, sweetheart. Quite the opposite." Liam tilted his head. "Dad said we were talking about important stuff." "We are," I replied. "Very important." Daniel sat down slowly across from me. He looked torn. Torn between loyalty, confusion, and the creeping realization that this wasn't going to be a simple paperwork conversation. "Mom," he said carefully, "Clara should really be part of this." I held his gaze. "She chose not to include me in important moments for 5 years," I said softly. "Today, I'm choosing differently." He swallowed. Outside, Clara knocked once. Sharp. Impatient. I didn't move. Emma looked toward the door. "Mom's knocking." "I hear her," I said calmly. The knock came again. Harder. Daniel stood halfway up. "This is getting uncomfortable." I tilted my head. Was it uncomfortable when I stood on her porch holding cookies? I asked quietly. He froze. And that's when it hit him. The memory. The door. The silence. He slowly sat back down. The knocking stopped. I leaned forward and slid the stack of papers toward him. "Daniel," I said gently, 6 months ago, when Clara told me I was whatever she allowed me to be, something changed inside me. His face paled. "She said that." Emma whispered. Daniel looked ashamed. "Mom, I didn't come here to fight," I continued calmly. "I came here to make sure my husband's life work, and mine, is protected." I opened the top folder. "This is my updated trust." Daniel blinked. "Updated?" "Yes." I handed him the first page. The bold letters at the top read, "Whitmore Family Trust, restated and secured. I've placed the house, the lake property, and my investment accounts into a protected trust," I explained. Liam's eyes widened. "The lake house too?" "Yes, baby." Daniel's hands shook slightly as he flipped through the pages. "And the beneficiaries?" he asked slowly. I looked at Emma and Liam. "You too." Silence. Not dramatic silence. Heavy silence. Daniel looked up sharply. "What?" "The primary beneficiaries of everything I own are Emma Whitmore and Liam Whitmore," I said clearly. He stared at me like he'd misheard. "Mom, what about?" I didn't let him finish. "Spouses have no access," I added gently. "The trust is structured so that assets are protected from marital claims." The air changed. Outside, Clara's shadow appeared at the window. She was trying to listen. I continued, steady as ever. "Funds will be released when each child turns 25. Education is covered. The properties cannot be sold without both of their consent." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You cut Clara out." "No," I said softly. "I secured my grandchildren's future." He ran a hand through his hair. "She's going to lose her mind." I gave a small smile. "Isn't that interesting?" I replied. "Because when she lost her mind, she shut a grandmother out of her grandchildren's lives." Emma looked at me carefully. "Grandma, does this mean Mom did something bad?" Children always sense truth before adults do. I sighed gently. "It means," I said carefully, "that sometimes grown-ups forget kindness, and sometimes they need reminders." Daniel stood up abruptly and walked toward the window. Clara saw him and immediately straightened. He opened the curtain slightly. Their eyes locked. Her expression shifted from curiosity to panic. She knew. She knew something had changed. He turned back toward me slowly. "She thought we were discussing control," he said quietly. I folded my hands. "We are." Another knock. This one loud. Angry. "Daniel." Clara's voice came through the door. "Open this door right now." Liam flinched. I stood calmly. "Children, I said softly. Why don't you take the cookies to the kitchen and pick a movie? They looked uncertain, but Daniel nodded at them gently. As soon as they disappeared down the hallway, Clara pounded on the door again. Daniel looked at me helplessly. What do you want me to do? I walked to the front door, placed my hand on the handle, and paused. Then I turned back to my son. Before I open this door, I said quietly, you need to understand something. He waited. I am not angry. He looked confused. I am awake. I opened the door. Clara stormed in. What is going on? She demanded. Her eyes went straight to the papers on the coffee table. And that's when she saw it. Her name wasn't anywhere on them. Not as trustee. Not as beneficiary. Not as decision maker. Nothing. Her composure cracked. You can't do this, she snapped. I met her gaze evenly. Oh, I already did. Her breathing grew sharper. Daniel stood between us, torn. You manipulated him, she accused. No, I said calmly. I outlasted you. She stepped closer. You think this makes you powerful? I tilted my head slightly. No. Iraplia. It makes me protected. Her eyes burned. You'll regret humiliating me like this. And that's when I delivered the sentence she would carry with her forever. I stood on your porch once, I said quietly, and I felt small. I stepped closer. Now you know how that feels. The room was silent except for her uneven breathing. But this wasn't revenge. Not yet. Because what Clara didn't know was that I wasn't finished. There was one more decision. One final move. And it would determine whether she ever controlled anything in this family again. Clara was shaking. Not the fragile, teary shaking she used when she wanted sympathy. This was anger. Real anger. You can't just cut me out, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through glass. I'm Daniel's wife. I'm their mother. I stood steady in the doorway of my own living room. And I am their grandmother, I replied calmly. And this is my estate. Daniel stepped forward, trying to lower the temperature in the room. Okay, everyone just breathe. But this wasn't a moment for breathing. This was a moment for truth. Clara turned to him, eyes blazing. Are you just going to let her do this? Let her punish me? Punish? There it was again. The victim script. I folded my hands lightly in front of me. This isn't punishment. Oh really? She laughed bitterly. Because it feels a lot like revenge. I met her gaze without blinking. If I wanted revenge, I said softly, you would have been served papers by now. Silence. Daniel looked at me sharply. Papers. Clara's face drained of color for half a second. Just half a second. But I saw it. I'm not here to destroy anyone. I continued calmly. I'm here to set a boundary. Daniel exhaled slowly. Mom, what boundary? I walked back to the coffee table and picked up the final folder, the one I hadn't shown them yet. This trust, I said carefully, remains exactly as written under one condition. Clara crossed her arms defensively. And what condition is that? I looked at Daniel. Not at her. At least equal access. He frowned. Access to what? To my grandchildren. The air went still. No more gatekeeping, I said firmly. No more scheduling my love like it's a dentist appointment. No more telling me I'm too involved or too outdated. Clara scoffed. You're making this about yourself. Yes, I replied evenly. For once I am. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom, you're asking me to choose. No. Ikurakta janli. I'm asking you to balance. Clara's voice rose. So if we don't agree, what? You punish the kids. That accusation hit the room like a thrown glass. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. The children are protected either way, I said clearly. Their trust is sealed. It cannot be altered by anyone, including me. That stunned her. Daniel blinked. You locked it permanently? Yes. Emma and Liam's future was already secured. Unchangeable. Protected from divorce. Protected from manipulation. Protected from greed. Clara realized something terrifying in that moment. The money was no longer leverage. It was off the table. You planned this, she whispered. I prepared. I corrected. Daniel looked overwhelmed. So what exactly are you asking? I faced him fully. I want Sunday dinners back, I said simply. I want school recitals, soccer games, birthdays, holidays. Clara laughed harshly. You can't buy your way into our home. I'm not buying anything, I replied calmly. I'm reminding you that family isn't something you control. She stepped closer, voice venomous now. You think Daniel will pick you over me? The room felt tight, heavy. Daniel stood frozen between us. And that's when I did something neither of them expected. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped aside. If you feel this is manipulation, I said gently to Clara, you are free to leave. The power shifted again. She looked at Daniel, waiting, demanding. He didn't move. His silence answered more loudly than words ever could. Her face hardened. You'll regret humiliating me, she said through clenched teeth. No. Iraplia sufli. I regret staying silent for 5 years. She grabbed her purse violently from the chair. Daniel's voice cracked. Clara. But she was already at the door. She stopped just before stepping out, turned slowly, and said the one thing she thought would wound me. They'll choose me. I'm their mother. I didn't flinch. I hope they choose kindness, I answered. She left. The door closed behind her. This time gently. Daniel stood there for a long moment. Then he sank into the couch like the weight of everything had finally landed. Mom, he whispered. What are we doing? I sat across from him. We're rebuilding, I said quietly. Or we're separating truth from illusion. He covered his face with his hands. She's going to file for divorce, he murmured. I didn't react with shock. Because I had already considered that possibility. Then that will be her choice, I said calmly. He looked up slowly. You really changed, didn't you? I smiled faintly. No, sweetheart. I remembered who I was. From the kitchen, I heard Emma's laugh. Liam's voice arguing about which movie to watch. Life continuing. Daniel followed the sound with his eyes. They missed you, he admitted softly. I missed them more, I said. He nodded, slowly understanding something deeper. Clara had controlled access. But she hadn't controlled love. And now? She had lost control entirely. But here's what neither of them knew yet. Clara wasn't done. Because when someone loses power suddenly, they don't always walk away quietly. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Official. Stamped. And filled with accusations that could have torn everything apart. She wasn't just angry. She was desperate. And desperation makes people dangerous. 2 weeks after Clara stormed out of my house, the letter arrived. Cream envelope. Legal stamp. My full name typed in bold black ink like I was some kind of defendant in my own life. I stood at my kitchen counter holding it, feeling the weight of paper that was meant to scare me. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. Because fear only wins if you rush. When I finally slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the pages, I almost laughed. Petition for emergency psychological evaluation. She was claiming I was mentally unstable, that I was manipulating Daniel, that I was weaponizing estate assets to emotionally coerce minor children. Weaponizing love. That's what she was calling it. I read every word slowly. She described me as confused, paranoid, controlling, experiencing late-onset cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. Because apparently, when an older woman draws boundaries, she must be losing her mind. I sat down at the dining table and let the silence stretch around me. 5 years ago, this letter would have shattered me. 5 years ago, I would have called Daniel in tears, apologizing for something I hadn't done. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I folded the letter neatly, picked up my phone, and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. I was wondering when she'd make a move. She's requesting a psych evaluation, I said calmly. Evelyn sighed softly. Classic intimidation tactic. If she can frame you as incompetent, she regains leverage over the trust. Leverage. There it was again. But here's the problem, Evelyn continued. Your trust is irrevocable and medically cleared. You passed cognitive review when we signed. That's right. When I updated everything, I had voluntarily undergone a full cognitive assessment, memory testing, psychological screening, legal competency evaluation. All documented. All notarized. I had anticipated resistance. I just didn't know how desperate she'd become. She wants control back, I said quietly. And she's realizing she doesn't have it, Evelyn replied. I hung up feeling something unexpected. Not anger. Pity. Because this wasn't about money anymore. This was about ego. About losing dominance. About a woman who never imagined the quiet grandmother would stand up. That evening, Daniel showed up unannounced. He looked exhausted. He held the same letter in his hand. She sent me a copy, he said quietly. I nodded. I figured she would. He walked inside slowly, like a man stepping into a courtroom. Mom, she's saying you need psychiatric evaluation. I know. She says you're manipulating the kids. That you're isolating me from her. I tilted my head gently. Do you feel isolated? I asked. He hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything. I feel clearer, he admitted. We sat across from each other at the table. The same table where I had once signed birthday cards alone. She's pushing for temporary guardianship review, he said. That made me inhale slowly. So now I'm dangerous to my own grandchildren. She says you're unstable. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel, I said softly, look at me. He did. Do I seem unstable? No. Do I seem confused? No. Have I ever harmed your children? Never. Then this isn't about my mind, I said calmly. It's about her losing control. He covered his face with his hands. She's furious, he whispered. She says you humiliated her. That you turned me against her. I didn't turn you, I said gently. You turned toward truth. He looked up slowly. She wants the house. There it was. Finally spoken aloud. She said if we reconcile and everything goes back to normal, we can fix the trust situation. I almost smiled. Fix. Meaning reverse. Meaning restore her access. She's not fighting for family, I said quietly. She's fighting for position. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I don't know who she is anymore. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Sometimes people reveal themselves when pressure is applied. He nodded slowly. She's filing for divorce, he said. The words hung in the air. There it was. The consequence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I simply nodded. If that's her decision, I replied softly, then she was never fighting for marriage. She was fighting for control. He stared at the table. She's asking for full custody. That made my pulse shift. Not fear. Alertness. On what grounds? I asked calmly. She claims you're influencing the children emotionally. I almost laughed at the irony. After 5 years of being shut out, now I was too influential. Daniel, I said firmly, love is not manipulation. He nodded, but I could see the weight on him. She thinks this will scare you into changing the trust, he admitted. I leaned forward slightly. Is it working? He looked up at me. No. That single word carried more power than anything else that day. Clara believed she could intimidate me, shame me, label me unstable. But she forgot something crucial. I spent decades raising a son who knows the difference between chaos and calm. And right now, she was chaos. 2 days later, her lawyer formally filed the petition. And the court date was set. She wanted a judge to question my mental stability, to strip credibility, to shake me publicly. What she didn't know was that I wasn't walking into that courtroom alone. And when the judge reviewed my medical evaluations, when he heard from Emma and Liam themselves, when Daniel had to testify about who had actually isolated who, the narrative shifted in a way Clara never anticipated. And that courtroom? That's where she finally realized. She had picked the wrong woman to intimidate. The morning of the hearing, I wore navy blue. Not black. Not gray. Navy. Because I wasn't mourning anything. I was standing in it. The courthouse downtown smelled like polished wood and old tension. Daniel walked beside me, quiet, composed, but I could feel the storm inside him. Clara walked ahead with her attorney. heels sharp against the marble floor like punctuation marks of defiance. She didn't look at me. That told me everything. Inside the courtroom, I sat upright, hands folded neatly in my lap. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't angry. I was ready. When the judge entered, the room shifted into that familiar hush. The kind that reminds everyone this is where stories stop being whispers and start becoming record. Clara's attorney began first. He painted a careful picture. An elderly grandmother experiencing emotional decline. A vulnerable son being manipulated. Children pressured by financial incentives. I listened without interrupting. 5 years ago, I would have shrunk under that language. Today, I let it pass over me like wind. Then it was our turn. Evelyn stood, calm, composed, almost bored by the dramatics. She presented my cognitive evaluation first. Full neurological assessment. Psychological clearance. Independent competency certification. All completed before the trust was finalized. The judge adjusted his glasses and read silently for several minutes. Clara's confidence began to flicker. Then Evelyn presented the trust structure. Irrevocable. Child-centered. Protected from marital claims. Your Honor, Evelyn said evenly. This trust secures the future of the minor children regardless of the marital status of the parents. It removes financial leverage from emotional disputes. Removes leverage. That phrase landed heavily. Clara's attorney shifted in his seat. Then came the question I knew was coming. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, looking directly at me. Did you exclude your daughter-in-law from your estate out of retaliation? The room went still. Even Clara leaned forward. I stood. Yes, Your Honor, I said clearly. Ghasts are quieter in real life than they are in movies. But they still exist. The judge raised an eyebrow. Explain. I retaliated against exclusion, I said calmly. Not against a person. I saw Clara stiffen. For 5 years, I continued. I was denied meaningful access to my grandchildren. I respected boundaries. I waited. I asked. I was turned away. Daniel lowered his head slightly. I updated my estate to ensure that love could never again be used as leverage against me. The judge studied me carefully. Are you attempting to control your son's marriage? No, I answered immediately. I am protecting my dignity. Silence. Real silence. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked to hear from Daniel. He walked to the front slowly. Swore in. Clara's eyes locked onto him, silently pleading. He took a breath. My mother is not unstable, he said. Clara's face went pale. She is the most emotionally consistent person in this room. That one sentence shifted everything. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, do you believe your mother is manipulating you? Daniel hesitated. The longest 3 seconds of Clara's life. No, he said finally. I believe she stopped allowing herself to be manipulated. Clara closed her eyes. That was the moment. The crack. The unraveling. Her attorney tried one last angle. He suggested that the children might feel pressured by the inheritance. The judge surprised everyone. He asked if the children had expressed fear or discomfort. A court-appointed family counselor stepped forward. No, Your Honor, she said. The children expressed confusion about the adult conflict, but described their grandmother as calm and safe. Safe. I saw Clara's composure finally fracture. Because this was never supposed to reach this point. It was supposed to scare me, silence me, push me into compliance. Instead, it exposed something else entirely. The judge leaned back. I find no evidence of cognitive decline, he said firmly. Nor do I find evidence of coercion. Estate planning decisions fall within Mrs. Whitmore's legal rights. Clara's attorney attempted to object. The judge shut it down with one sentence. This court does not regulate hurt feelings. And just like that, her strategy collapsed. The petition was dismissed. Public record. Documented. Final. Outside the courtroom, Clara stood frozen. Daniel walked toward her slowly. She looked at him with something between fury and disbelief. You chose her, she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was heavier than that. No, he said quietly. Ich chose Fairness. She shook her head. Tears finally falling, not from sorrow, from loss of control. I didn't approach her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply walked past her, steady, dignified, untouched. Because revenge isn't loud. It's controlled. But here's the part she never anticipated. Winning in court didn't fix the marriage. And when power shifts that dramatically, something always breaks. 3 weeks later, Daniel came to my house with a suitcase in his hand. And what he told me that night changed everything again. 3 weeks after the courtroom, my doorbell rang at 9:42 p.m. Late enough to mean something wasn't right. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing there. One suitcase, one duffel bag, and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. For a second I didn't speak. Because this wasn't the little boy who used to scrape his knees in my backyard. This was a grown man who had just walked away from something permanent. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. Ah, that voice. Not defensive. Not confused. Not torn. Resolved. I stepped aside without asking questions. Kumein. He walked into the same living room where Clara once stood demanding control. Now it was silent. Heavy. He placed the suitcase near the couch and ran his hand through his hair. "She filed," he said. I nodded slowly. I assumed she would. "She wanted me to contest your competency again," he continued. "Said we could reopen it during the custody battle." And there it was. The real fight had begun. Custody. Not marriage. Not healing. Control. I sat down and gestured for him to do the same. "I told her no," he said. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. "She said if I didn't fight you, she'd fight me." I didn't rush to comfort him. Some lessons settle deeper when you let silence hold them. "And what did you say?" I asked gently. He looked up at me. "I said I was done fighting the wrong person." That sentence, it landed differently. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just true. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I didn't see it before, Mom. I kept thinking you two just didn't get along." I gave a small, knowing smile. Sometimes we don't see imbalance until someone removes it. He nodded slowly. "She told me today that if she couldn't control the trust, she'd make sure I regretted it." There it was again. Control. Threats dressed as hurt. "And the kids?" I asked softly. He swallowed. "They heard us arguing." My chest tightened at that. Emma asked if we were getting divorced because of Grandma. Ah, that one hurt. "And what did you tell her?" I whispered. "I told her divorce happens when adults forget how to respect each other," he said quietly. "Not because of Grandma." Tears filled his eyes, but didn't fall. "She said she feels safe here." Safe. That word again. I stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of tea like I used to when he was studying for finals in college. "Are you staying here?" I asked gently. "For a while," he admitted. "Then you're staying," I said simply. No conditions. No lectures. No victory speeches. Just space. That night, long after he fell asleep on the couch, I sat alone in the dark. This wasn't the revenge I imagined. I never wanted my son's marriage to collapse. I wanted respect, balance, dignity. But when control is the foundation of a relationship, remove control, and the structure cracks. The next week was quiet but tense. Lawyers. Mediation meetings. Custodie discussion. Clara wasn't going down easily. She accused Daniel of financial betrayal. She claimed I had brainwashed him. She even implied I was attempting to alienate the children. But the court record from the competency hearing made one thing very clear. Her credibility had weakened. And judges noticed patterns. Then came the mediation session. Clara requested one private conversation with me. Just the 2 of us. Daniel didn't want me to go. But I did. We met in a small conference room at her attorney's office. No cameras. No judge. No audience. Just 2 women who had finally stripped away the performance. She looked tired. Not furious. Not theatrical. Just tired. "You won," she said flatly. I shook my head. "This isn't winning." She laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my leverage." There it was again. Leverage. I removed it. I corrected calmly. Because love shouldn't require leverage. She stared at the table. For 5 years I thought you were weak, she admitted. I didn't react. I thought if I limited access you'd shrink. I almost did, I said quietly. She looked up sharply. But you went too far. I continued. You mistook patience for powerlessness. Silence stretched between us. You embarrassed me, she said softly. No, irreplicably. You embarrassed yourself when you slammed that door. Her jaw tightened. I was protecting my household. By isolating children from their grandmother? Her voice dropped. I didn't like not being the center. Ah, there it was. Not money. Not safety. Not structure. Control of emotional space. I leaned forward slightly. You don't lose being a mother because your children love someone else. Her eyes filled, but not with tears. With realization. And now? She asked quietly. Now, I said. You decide whether you want peace or power. She didn't answer. Because some questions take longer to digest. The custody mediation ended with shared parenting. Daniel moved into a nearby rental. The children split time evenly. I was granted scheduled visitation rights, court documented. Documented. Not dependent on permission. Not vulnerable to mood. Protected. But here's the twist she never expected. Even after everything. I didn't cut her out. Because revenge isn't destruction. It's restoration of balance. And balance. Balance is what was coming next. Because a month later, Clara showed up at my house again. Not angry. Not demanding. But holding something in her hands that changed the entire tone of our story. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when she came back. No lawyers. No sharp heels clicking against my porch. No rehearsed smile. Just Clara. Standing there alone. Holding a small white envelope in her hands. When I opened the door, we stared at each other for a long moment. No anger this time. No courtroom tensión. Just two women who had finally seen each other without armor. Hi, she said softly. Her voice was different. Less polished. More human. Clara. Irreplicably. She looked thinner. Tired in a way makeup can't fix. Divorce mediation does that to a person. Losing control does that too. I won't take much of your time, she said. I needed to give you this. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Not typed. Not strategic. Handwritten. I couldn't say this in front of lawyers, she added quietly. I stepped aside. Kumain. She hesitated. Funny how roles reverse. This time, I didn't block the doorway. She walked in slowly, glancing around the living room like it held history she'd never bothered to see before. We sat at the dining table. The same table where I once cried alone. I unfolded the letter. Her handwriting wasn't perfect. A few words scratched out. A few sentences clearly rewritten. She had struggled with it. I was jealous of you. I looked up at her. She didn't look away. From the beginning, she continued softly. Daniel listens to you in a way he doesn't listen to anyone else. The kids light up around you. I felt replaced. I let her speak. Because interruption would have turned confession into defense. I told myself I was protecting my household, she said. But really, I was protecting my position. There it was again. Position. Control. I grew up in a house where love was conditional, she admitted. If I wasn't the center, I disappeared. That explained more than anger ever could. So when the kids loved you, she whispered, it felt like losing. I exhaled slowly. Love isn't a pie, I said gently. It doesn't shrink when shared. She nodded faintly. I know that now. Silence sat between us, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was processing. I shouldn't have slammed the door, she said finally. No excuses attached. No blamru directive. Just truth. That moment changed everything. I replied quietly. I wanted you to feel small, she admitted. You succeeded, I said honestly. Her eyes filled. And when you made me stand on your porch, I understood. Ah. Not revenge. Reflection. She swallowed. I thought you'd cut me out forever. I considered it, I admitted calmly. She nodded, accepting that. But I didn't. I continued. Because the children deserve adults who grow. Her shoulders dropped slightly, like a weight had shifted. Daniel told me something, she said carefully. He said you told him you weren't angry. You were awake. I smiled faintly. That's true. She looked at me differently then. Not as an opponent. As a woman who had finally stopped tolerating disrespect. I don't want to fight anymore, she said quietly. I studied her face. This wasn't panic. This wasn't strategy. This was exhaustion meeting humility. Then don't, I replied simply. She nodded. I'm not asking about the trust, she added quickly. I know that's not changing. It's not, I said calmly. I'm asking about holidays, birthdays, school events. Ah, the real request. Not money, access. The same thing she once controlled. You want shared space, I said gently. Yes. And can you handle not being the center? I asked directly. She didn't answer immediately. But when she did, it was honest. I'm learning. That was enough for me. I will never compete with you, I said softly. But I will never disappear again. She nodded firmly. Understood. For the first time in years, we weren't negotiating power. We were negotiating peace. Before she left, she paused at the doorway. The same doorway that once held humiliation. I'm sorry, she said clearly. Not whispered. Not rushed. I believe you, I replied. And I did. Not because she cried. Not because she lost. But because she finally understood something deeper. Control builds fear. Respect builds stability. After she left, I sat alone for a while. 5 years of tension. One slammed door. One courtroom. One broken marriage. And here we were. Balanced. But here's the part that surprised even me. A month later, at Emma's school recital, Clara saved me a seat. Right beside her. And when Emma finished her piano solo, she looked at both of us in the audience. And smiled the same smile. Not divided. Not confused. Whole. But there was still one final moment, one last scene, that closed this chapter completely. Because the true ending didn't happen in a courtroom. Or at mediation. It happened quietly. On Thanksgiving. 5 years ago. I stood on a porch with a tin of cookies in my hands. And a door slammed in my face. This Thanksgiving? Clara rang my doorbell. And waited. Not because she had to. Because she chose to. When I opened the door, the air smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey. The house felt warm, not just heated but alive. Emma and Liam rushed past their parents and wrapped their arms around me before I could say a word. Grandma, we're early so we can help. I laughed. Well then, I hope you're ready to peel potatoes. Behind them, Daniel stood steady, calmer than I'd seen him in years. And Clara? She didn't step forward automatically. She didn't assume. She looked at me, waiting. That small pause told me more than any apology ever could. Happy Thanksgiving, Margaret, she said softly. Margaret. Not forced. Not rehearsed. Just respectful. Happy Thanksgiving, I replied. And then I stepped aside. Fully. No half-blocked doorway. No lesson to deliver. Just space. She walked in slowly, taking in the table already set with my late husband's china. The same one that once sat and used while I ate alone. This time, every chair would be filled. Dinner was loud. Messy. Real. Liam argued about football with Daniel. Emma insisted on making the cranberry sauce herself. Clara helped in the kitchen without trying to direct it. At one point, our hands brushed while reaching for the same serving spoon. 5 years ago, that would have been tension. Tonight, it was neutral. Balanced. After we sat down, I looked around the table and let myself breathe it in. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. Halfway through dinner, Emma tapped her glass with a fork. I want to say something, she announced proudly. We all looked at her. I'm thankful that everyone is here, she said. And that nobody is fighting anymore. Children say things adults spend years complicating. Clara looked down at her plate for a moment. Then she cleared her throat. I'd like to say something too. The room quieted. She stood, Not dramatically, just sincerely. 5 years ago, she began slowly, I thought protecting my family meant controlling it. Her voice was steady. I thought if I wasn't the center, I would lose everything. She glanced at me. I was wrong. No excuses. No justificación. Just ownership. I confused power with security, she continued. And I hurt someone who never deserved it. The room felt still, but not tense. Reflective. She looked directly at me. Thank you, she said quietly, for not destroying me when you had the chance. Ah, there it was. The truth she had finally understood. I smiled gently. Revenge doesn't fix families, I replied. It just rearranges the pain. Daniel reached for Clara's hand under the table. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. Out of partnership. Balanced partnership. Later that evening, after dishes were washed and leftovers packed, Clara lingered near the doorway as everyone gathered their coats. She turned to me softly. You taught me something, she said. What's that? I asked. That love isn't something you manage, she replied. It's something you make room for. I nodded. And boundaries, she added. Boundaries protect love, I said gently. They don't compete with it. When the door finally closed that night, it didn't echo. It didn't sting. It didn't symbolize exclusion. It simply closed. Because doors aren't weapons. People make them that way. 5 years ago, I thought losing access to my grandchildren would break me. Instead, it woke me up. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by destroying. I didn't even win in court. I won the moment I stopped shrinking. The moment I understood that dignity is louder than anger. The moment I refused to stand on someone's porch feeling small ever again. And here's the truth, if you've stayed with me this far. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't taking something away. It's standing still until the other person sees themselves clearly. And when they do, you don't slam the door. You decide whether to open it. If this story moved you, if you believe respect in family matters more than control, then stay with this channel. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest lessons. And I'm not done telling them.